this event, this time together, I would really love it just to be a kind of very informal chat about, well, about you and about your work and your books especially. So just some questions I want to cover. We'll have a chat for about maybe 40 minutes or so, and there'll be time at the end, as I said, for people to ask you questions. But first of all, whenever I do interviews people, I just want to learn more about them as a person. I imagine people, if you've done interviews before, people just ask about your book straight away. But would you be able to tell us a bit about your background, if that's all right?
Yes, of course. I'm originally from Lancashire, and but I've been in Edinburgh for it's now 34 years. I'm embarrassed to say, so that's really quite some time. And I always did a lot of writing when I was younger, and yes, actually, I found a notebook that I used to write stories in that my mother sent to me when I used to write in as I was a child. I found it just before our event, and I thought, what did I used to write about? The answer is, I wrote a story called The Ghost of Jim, and another one, The Mystery of the False Teeth. So I was about 10 years old at the time when I was doing these magnificent works. It's just so rammed with spelling mistakes, you wouldn't believe it. So some things never change because I'm just as bad now as I was then. But I suppose I've always written stories. I've always read stories and adventures and so on. Mm-hmm. And when I went to university, I went to do English. And I failed a bit of it and I felt a bit ambivalent towards it. So I moved to do history. And when I was doing history at university, I always focused on the bits that were about literature. So the George Orwell novels or the novels of 19th century France. You know, it was always the kind of literary element of it that interested me. So that English or history thing was always a bit, it was both of those things that appealed to me. And then being able to write a PhD in the history of medicine, you know, what a dream that was to spend time researching. And it's social history, so it's really people's lives, and it was that immediacy. And it was a local history because it's set in Edinburgh. So it was really exciting, really enjoyed it. And I think I really was able to develop writing skills and confidence. And that's, to be honest, I think that was a big thing for me.
It's always interesting to hear how people have ended up in doing stuff in the history of medicine and medical history as well, because I feel like you can come at it from so many different angles. As you said, yours was from the English and literature point of view, that you came in initially, and then Ed found this fascinating topic that is history of medicine and medical history. And then, whereas me, for example, I kind of came from the other side, from the kind of medical, clinical, and scientific side. And then one lecture on medical history just got me absolutely hooked. And I feel like that's one of the great things that I will go on to talk about your books, is that there's so many different aspects to it. It's not simply just about medicine. It's about people. So you said you went on to do a PhD.
Yes.
That was in Edinburgh. And what was the topic of the PhD? Like, what were you researching?
It was about the first generation of female doctors. So how and why did they enter the profession? What was it like being educated as the first generation of women doctors? What type of medicine did they practice when they were able to practice? And so it was pretty much from about 1870 or late 1860s through to 1930, and I just focused on Edinburgh and this first cohort of women that managed to get into the university.
So was that like the Edinburgh, is it the Edinburgh 7? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. They're really famous now because they've recently had a centenary, and I was kind of wheeled out again last year at Surgeons Hall for a few kind of things because that had been my PhD. Amazingly, when I started the topic, no one had really written an academic PhD on the Edinburgh 7. There was some kind of not academic stuff, a bit more accessible, but not some of it was archive based. And so it did surprise me that there was this archive. I was looking for something to do, and I went into the special collections at Edinburgh University with some idea of I wanted to do something to do with history, science or medicine. And they said, well, we've got this big box of stuff from the Edinburgh Women's Hospital. What about that? And it had not been looked at.
Oh my goodness.
I know, there it was. I mean, it was 20 years ago now, maybe in fact more than that. But even so, you'd think more people would have made the effort with the source material, but they hadn't. So so I did it. And it was really interesting. You know, I suppose I thought the women would do more exciting things than they did, you know. But when I found out that they'd kind of seeped out of the university and gone to be GPs and stuff, I was slightly disappointed. When you look at the kind of difficulties they'd had to get into the profession, you can hardly blame them for keeping a low profile once they've managed to get a job.
Yeah.
So I guess that's excusable. But I did, for most of my history novels, the Jem Flockhart books, I'm a bit further back in history than
Yes, you are.
the period that I studied for my PhD. I'm from the 1850s rather than the later 19th century.
So did that kind of research into the first kind of medical women influence then the Jem Flockhart books?
Well, what influenced me, I think, was when I was reading about why women had wanted to enter the medical profession, and I read about how women were treated generally by doctors and regarded as having smaller brains and unable to do proper work and couldn't join the professions, you know, and the idea of if they behaved badly, they needed to have their uteruses taken out, which is an extreme example of social control, but it was a thing.
Yes.
And all of that was sort of earlier in the period, and it was that and the kind of the awfulness of it that I mean, I don't like to use the word appealed to me, because who wants to say awful things appealed to them? But it was that kind of intrigued me, I think.
Yes.
Also reading about, obviously, James Miranda Barry, you know, the first woman to be to get a medical degree from Edinburgh University, who had to disguise herself as a man in order to graduate. So I'd read about that, and that influenced me probably more than anything I did in my PhD about the women themselves, actually. And also, do you know what, Kirsty, by the time I was writing novels, I'd finished my doctorate, and I was a bit sick of the late 19th century and the early 20th. I was kind of happy to leave that to one side and go and look at something that was relevant, that I knew a bit about, but that was maybe a bit fresher to me.
Because I think people can read your books and Jem Flockhart and Jem being a woman disguised as a man and think, oh, that's, you know, and the time it's set in, and be like, oh, that's crazy. Like, no one would have done that. But actually, if you look, not just in medicine, but I listen to a lot of kind of history podcasts, and there were actually a lot of women who did that just to get into a professional career. It wasn't just medicine. It was, you know, almost any form of business. And yeah, so I think some people could look at that and be like, that's, you know, no one ever did that. Like, that's clearly made up. But actually, there are people who did that.
Yeah.
It's not all fiction.
No, well, even female pirates. I mean, I know that's not a profession thing, isn't it? There's, and we've got examples of that. So I think, you know, wherever you go, you may not know it, but there'd be women maybe disguised, but doing the things that men do. So it, you know, I guess it's not that novel a proposition to disguise a woman. But what I wanted to do with Jem is, I didn't want a male protagonist. I wanted a female protagonist, because I'm a woman and I'd done women's history, and it just seemed right to me to sort of stick with that, as it were. But I wanted a woman, but I wanted her to be able to go everywhere where the men were, not to be constantly having to defend her position. You know, I'm a woman, let me in, I can do it, blah, blah, blah. So I thought, for disguiser, she doesn't have to constantly have those endless comments. She can just go in. But she can take part, she can worry about being discovered, she can reflect on her position, she can reflect on other women, she can think about how the benefits of being able to take part in a man's world, earn her own money, being independent, but lament the fact that she can't have children, she can never have a family life. So to look at both sides of that argument, I thought it would add an extra dimension to it, to have her reflect on those things, and make it maybe a bit more interesting. And it might have been interesting to have her as a woman doing all this. I'm not saying that's impossible. She would have had to continually defend, let me in, I can do it, step aside, and it just would have been too either repetitive in that sense, or if I hadn't addressed those issues, it just would have been anachronistic. You'd think, well, nobody would have done that or got away with that in 1850. So the disguise seemed the best way forward, I thought.
So a bit of I not out there question, but so Jem is an apothecary. So in a world where she is dealing with a lot of medical men and surgical men as well, was that a very conscious decision to make Jem an apothecary?
Well, do you know, I sometimes wish I hadn't made Jem an apothecary. I sometimes wish I hadn't done that. Because all the reading I did about who ran the great hospitals in the early 19th century, and everything's told me that the apothecary was the key character, that they would have a house and the apothecary was there, and the doctors and surgeons would swan in and out, making, you know, decisions and saying things and leading students around.
Yep.
Well, they weren't there every day. They weren't like we think of hospital consultants. Although they would be involved, but not all the time, that it was the apothecary who saw to the general running of the hospital day after day. And because I'd picked 1850, it's a period of massive change and transition in just about every part of life and business and everything. But the medical profession itself, you were starting to get increased, you know, the professionalisation of doctors with the General Medical Council and the Medical Register and these things coming in the later 1850s. But the role of the apothecary changed quite dramatically from having this key role in the hospitals to being something that we maybe see as a GP these days, and the qualification itself becoming a bit more of a kind of a jobbing role rather than a serious sort of hospital professional. So I gave Jem this apothecary role because she was following this tradition of her family who'd always done that. And now I've got her stuck in an apothecary job in a side street because they've knocked the hospital down. So it's not quite what I wanted her to do. So one of my plans was to, as I maybe mentioned to Ross, was to maybe send Jem Flockhart to Glasgow to get an MD, you know, so she could be a proper doctor and use the title properly, and just to make her a little bit more professional and give her a Glasgow adventure as well. So that might be something that happens down the line.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's interesting because in the most recent book, in the fourth book, Surgeons Hall, you start to see that kind of not turmoil such, but that kind of inner argument she starts to have of like, actually, am I getting bored of the apothecary life now, and am I thinking of going into a surgical career or a medical career as well, which I as a reader, I was shocked by that, because I was like, oh no, like I want to say, oh no, stay in the apothecary, like stay there. But then I imagine just the influence of all the people that she's around will rub off eventually.
Yes, and you know, I haven't decided whether to do that or not. It's still kind of open in my mind for debate. So yeah, I don't know. I haven't quite decided what to do going forward. But I think she does, you know, she does feel a bit looked down upon by people who she thinks are actually not quite as good as she is, and the things that she can do and the stuff that she knows. And I, you know, I've reiterated that a little bit in the one I've just done. Dr. Graves said, you know, you're better than this. You could have a private patient and so on, like the rest of them do, rather than just giving out purgatives to fat ladies. So who knows, you know, whether I'll change that or I might just leave it. Yeah, so because she's certainly a figure that sort of straddles both halves of the century, the kind of the past when the apothecary is really important, but looking forward to a completely new world of you know, antiseptics and anaesthetic and all of these kind of things, and a different way of education, and the Surgeons Hall that you mentioned, the nature of medical education, the practical nature of surgery and anatomy and how it's taught. Again, these things are changing, and always that change is important. And that's partly why I set it in the mid-century, because it was so dynamic. You know, you could train as a doctor when you learn to cut someone's leg off without using anaesthetic. You've got no idea about germ theory and so on. And then 5 years later, you know, you've got to deal with both of those things. So I think it was revolutionary in this mid-period. And that's an interesting time.
It's a very good time to set it as well, as you said, because it just gives you a lot of opportunity with the plot too, because a lot of things were changing. So to kind of to move away from Jem slightly, so other characters you've mentioned, like Dr. Graves or Dr. Megorian, or the list is endless. Are any of them based on real historical people?
Yes, in fact, most of the history, in fact, all of the medical history that you read about in Jem Flockhart, it's all Scottish medical history of medicine. I just moved it down there because I wanted a sort of a big anonymous city. I felt if I'd set it in Edinburgh or Glasgow, I'd have to be very clear about locations and stuff, and I didn't want to add that to everything else I had to do, so I moved it away. But it's all history of medicine from Scotland, and so, well, for example, the book I've just finished, Nightshade, I've got a doctor, he's Dr. Christian, which is very nearly Dr. Christison, who was the big toxicologist in Edinburgh. And so my Dr. Christian, he's always testing drugs on himself, which Christison did. Christison used to, you know, chew on coca leaves and run around Arthur's Seat and, you know, monitor his pulse and other such crazy things. And my doctor has done all of those kind of things and tests stuff on himself. Only he's gone completely out of his mind due to an excess of testing things. But other people like Dr. Bain in the first novel, he's based on this sort of self-testing thing that many doctors did, but which was, I think, quite distinctive of, you know, people like Simpson and Christison and others who would have tried out stuff themselves. Yeah, and also in Surgeons Hall, you know, Robert Knox. If you know what Robert Knox looks like, you will recognise him in my description of one of the doctors in there, who's one of the more flamboyant demonstrators. He's got the big neckerchief and the rings and everything, and he says you have to make it dramatic and flamboyant because learning anatomy is actually rote learning. So to make it interesting, jokes, and I'm going to shoot the dog that I can see out of the window, and you know, he creates a big fuss to make it memorable. And that's Robert Knox, you know, who was the famous anatomist in Edinburgh, who wasn't just good at his job, he was good at it and had hundreds of students coming, because he had this charisma as he delivered his lectures.
I did see some of those kind of were a lot of these medical men quite flamboyant? Did they have to be to kind of get ahead, do you think?
You know, I don't know. I don't know whether they did, because I think some of them, you know, like Christison, he's quite an interesting character, isn't he? Because he was so famous and so knowledgeable about poisons and had done all these exciting cases, criminal cases, and then he was against the medical women. Totally blighted his copybook. So if he hadn't, everyone remembers Christison as being this beast who wouldn't let the medical women in and was in favour of the men and was mean to them, and that is his legacy, which is a bit of a shame. But I think he was maybe quite a doer man generally. But some of the others, I think, like a mix, which you probably get anywhere. Some of them maybe were flamboyant, others maybe a bit more understated. And some things, you know, I think some of them, it's about self-publicity, isn't it? Because I always got the feeling that someone like Lister was really good at banging his own drum. Someone like McEwen, the man who put doctors into white coats, was not good at self-publicity. And, you know, here I am. So, yes.
It's interesting that you mentioned the men, because a lot of it is men who pioneered these massive things in medicine, and yet, you know, with regards to women, they were just they're not getting in. Lister being one of them as well. So you do tackle a lot of themes in your books, but one of the main ones is just women and women in this society, their rights, how they were portrayed in society, a patriarchal society. So do you think that doing that through fiction, even though it is based on history, is a really kind of powerful way to show women's history and what they faced, and, you know, the fact that it's maybe not that different to what women face today?
Well, I hope it's a powerful way of kind of getting some of these ideas across. And I think I've said before that, you know, when I was doing my PhD, I read so many interesting things about the way women were treated that really opened my eyes. I didn't know those things and had maybe gone along thinking, oh yeah, everything's fine for women now, we're not treated badly, like many people do. And then the more I researched and read about it, the more my own, you know, interest in women and feminism and so on was ignited. And yet I did think the only people who are going to read my PhD are my supervisors and the examiners, and that's pretty much it. That's only people who look at it. And I thought, but this is too interesting to just be left there. And that was something when I started these novels that was important to me to try and communicate what I thought was a true picture of events. And people say things like, do you think London was really that dirty? And I think, yes, I think it was. I think most of the industrial towns and cities in Britain in 1850 were drowning in their own effluent. And in our world of detox and hand sanitizers, we've got no conception of what that would be like, and it would be truly hideous. So I try and demonstrate that in what I write, because I think a lot of fiction is very clean. You know, a lot of historical fiction is quite a clean representation of how things were. But in terms of, you know, I don't want to be a feminist writer as such. But I just want to try and, you know, maybe show how it was.
That's really interesting what you mentioned about, like, when people say, "Oh, was it really that dirty as a city?" Because the way you write, especially in your books, it covers all the senses. You know, you're very descriptive, like the smells and the sights, and just all the sensations you can think of are in that description. Is that quite? Do you like seeing that in books that you read that are some of your favourites, or is that's just a very natural thing for you to do as a writer?
I think it's a mixture. I think, Kirsty, that because I read a lot of 19th century fiction when I was younger, I didn't really read contemporary fiction. I was glued to things like Zola. And, you know, and he didn't hold back in his descriptions of what 19th century, late 19th century France and Paris was like, and the description of the sewers and things. And I love that stuff, that visceral picture of the past.
Yes, that's a good word, visceral.
I kind of wanted to do something similar. I thought it did smell bad, it did look bad, and this is how it sounded. And I do find when I read a historical novel, I kind of want to be there, and it takes more than just, for me anyway, more than just some good dialogue and those things. I want, what is it like actually? What does it look like? How does it feel when you touch it? What does it smell like? All of that stuff is important to me. I like to read it, but I also like writing it down, because I'm thinking, ooh, as I write it, like, oh, it was horrible, wasn't it? Oh, just it. And I think it's just something inside me that feels the need to describe gross things, pretty much.
I mean, that's fair. I mean, if they were gross, then just call it for what it is. And I think it's a way for you to kind of like, I think people always wish, oh, I wish I had a time machine and time travel was real and we could go back and see it. And actually, part of that we can do is kind of writing fiction based on history, and just, you know, historical accounts. And, you know, you talk a lot about in your books as well some of the common diseases of the time, for example, cholera in London. Oh, that is obviously to do with hygiene. So it's like it has to the way you describe things of all the senses, and was it really that dirty? Well, yeah, because just look at the health and look at the stats. And no, I found it just painted this I would say lovely picture, because some of this it's not nice, dirty London. But anyway, so a lot of your characters in your book, Jem is clearly hiding something. Jem is hiding her identity. But it's not just Jem that's hiding something. Something that I realised as I read the books, I was like, pretty much every character is hiding something. And was that quite a deliberate narrative that you wanted to get in? That it's just, you know, the obvious is Jem, but actually when you look at all of the other characters, they're hiding secrets.
Yes. I didn't make a conscious decision to do that, actually. I don't do a right lot of planning for things. I just kind of carry on, and then all at once there it is. It's not a big planning process for me. So everyone likes a secret. You know, we all like a secret. We like to have a secret because, you know, you don't know, do you? You know, because it's my secret, and we like to find out a secret and weasel it out. So I suppose it's just something that I quite like to have. So that's why I put them in. And it's nothing more conscious than that, I think, Kirsty. It just, surely that makes better fiction if there's something, because you want to read on. What is that secret? And even once you know it, now I know your secret, does everyone else know what's going to happen if they do know? Will it be found out? What are the consequences? So all of those things make for a little bit more sort of narrative drive and, you know, intrigue. And at the end of the day, you want someone to pick up your novel. and not really want to put it down again. And when they finish, to feel satisfied in some way. And so I think often by having secrets of one kind or another, that's a way of making somebody want to know what happens.
Yeah, and I think I'd never really properly read crime or mystery before, so I was quite new to the genre before I read your books. And then it just made you do have this incredible skill of weaving in all these different possibilities. Like my colleague Claire will laugh because I was taking notes, obviously, for keeping track of the books and the events, and I was trying to guess what was going to happen, as I imagine anyone would. And I got it wrong every time. Every book I got it wrong, and that just was an amazing skill of yours because I couldn't put the book down. I part of it was like I want to figure out who did it, but also I want to see if I'm right, and I was just awful each time because I just got it wrong. And I think that idea of people hiding things must just be such a fuel for crime and mystery. It's like, well, yeah, it makes you want to investigate.
That's it. And I think we do all like a mystery. I think everyone likes a little mystery. Why did that happen? What happened next? You know, family secrets. These are the things that are all intriguing because we love stories. Human beings love that story like that, you know. And so in terms of writing them, as I say, that lack of planning, and it's very kind of you to say that you have all these little weaving strands. I don't really plan that.
That is amazing because I was like, she must have these like blueprints on her wall of like who did this.
Well, I know the writers do, and post-it notes and strings and stuff, and I look at that and I think, crikey, that looks good, you know. That I should do that, but I can't. All I just have a notebook and a pen, and I think it's because when I started writing, I had no space. I was just on a little tiny desk. I used to write on the bus when I was going up to work at Napier before I learned to drive, and I had children, so I'd write it on the bus. So, you know, all it was these things, and that's it. And you can't really do your spider plans and stuff.
Yeah.
You just write your stuff. And also, I think it's about getting in your head and your own space, and if you can sort of get into that world in your own head, and just let your characters do their thing, you're just writing it down. You know, it's like writing the scenes that you see in your head. What also surprises me, and other writers have said the same thing, is that you write something in chapter 1 and don't think much about it, and all at once you find in chapter 5, oh yes, I'll use that again, and it comes back again in the end. So, for example, there's a doll in one of my novels, and I just put it in because it seemed reasonable to give this person a doll.
Yep.
And at the end, it's one of the most significant things. And it wasn't a plan that I made. Oh, yes, I must put that doll in because it's going to do these different things and so on. That's just the way it came. And when I wrote it, and I just wrote this thing with the doll at the end, and I had this sense of, yes, that worked out really well. Who knew that together? So, and I know other people who write say the same thing, that it kind of takes over on its own and fits together. But
Yeah.
I'm not a big planner, not at all. I haven't got the time. I haven't got time to plan. I've got a full-time job.
I know. I was going to say, how do you have time to write with all the things that you do? But that's really interesting that everyone's got their own writing style. I know people will go to workshops. These like creative writing workshops are really valuable. But I think one of the best things you can, I'm not a writer, but I imagine one of the best things you can tell people is like, you do what works best for you.
Yeah.
Everyone's life is different. So if you can churn out a novel doing it in, you know, a massive office or like, as you said, on a tiny notepad, then whatever works for you.
Yes. I knew somebody who said that he couldn't write until he'd stroked a typewriter, and he had one of those old-fashioned typewriters, and he used to lay his hands on the keys and sort of like, you know, imbibe the aura of the typewriter, and then he would go and, you know, do some writing or whatever, which, you know, I think, well, I'm tempted to take your typewriter away and see how you actually get on. But for me, it's because I've got a full-time job and 2 children, it's a case of what time do you have? And there is no time to start fiddling around with bits of string and post-it notes and getting precious about your workspace. If you want to write a novel, you shut up and you get on with the 10 minutes that you have. You write it on the bus, you do it when your kids are in bed, you do it at the back of a boring meeting about photocopiers at work, whatever it might be. You find those moments and you do it, and you can't be precious about anything really, otherwise you'd never finish.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's very adaptive. So one of the other themes, as well as many other things that you kind of explore in the books, is sexuality. So do you think that is kind of a really important thing to explore given the time it was set? So it's set in the 1850s, and I imagine, during this time there was a very kind of narrow view of what sexuality was. So is that something that you want to kind of explore more of?
Yes, I think so. But one of the things that I did want to do is that I didn't want to make it a big thing. I didn't want it to be a gay book or anything of that kind. And not because I've got a problem with books that are about gay people, but because I just wanted to make it normal. It's not a thing. It's not the other. It's not different. It's just a way to be, and that's totally fine. So I'd written them, and that was something in my mind that I wanted to make her disguised as a man, but also to be somebody that had feelings for women as a woman herself. And as I say, not to make a big deal of that. And if it becomes something more going forward, then maybe that's fine. But I didn't want it to be a big theme through each of the books. So yeah, because I just I think, I don't really care what anyone's sexuality is. So I just wanted it to be, well, here's a story and she happens to have that sexuality. So
yeah, it does read as very normal. I agree with you. You with your intention saying like I wanted it just to be normal. I didn't necessarily read it as a series that was like an LGBT series, for example, and that's how people would describe it. It was just that it was really interesting to see actually that's Jem, and that's it.
That's it. So yeah. In terms of sexuality, the book I've just finished, Nightshade, that has got a very strong female focus to it, more so than any of the others. Excuse me, it's partly because I gave the synopsis to my agent and she said, you need to put a few more women in this synopsis. So I thought, well, okay, then I'll make them all women. So I pretty much took out there's one man, the one who I make, addicted to drugs and who's gone out of his mind. But all the other characters in Nightshade, they're all women. It's all about women and what women do and how they behave and their relationships with each other. But again, I don't think I've made it an LGBT book. That's not what it's about. So people think of that when it comes out. But it's I've never wanted to make it into a big thing.
Yeah.
Whether that's right or wrong. In fact, there was somebody when I did an event at the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons in Glasgow with Beloved Poison when that was first out, and somebody in the audience said that she was LGBT and was glad that I had done the novel like this, that I'd just made it normal. I hadn't made it into a big thing to go on about as if it was different and other and all of those other things.
Exactly.
And I was very pleased at that because that had been my intention.
Yeah, definitely, and it does read like that. And I think making it more normal, like, is the way to go. It's not an other. It's not that's interesting. It's just normal. So what I wanted to ask, we talked about how you plan your books, and plan your writing, and it just kind of happens. But of the 4 books you've written, they all take place in very significant locations.
Yes.
So first was St Saviour's, then we've got the asylum, then we've got the floating hospital. Were they actually a thing? Floating hospitals, by the way. That's where are they? I thought that was made up. Sorry.
No, that's actually a thing. When I heard about it, I thought I can't just leave that bobbing in history. I've got to do something with it. So that's actually it. And I read quite a few things about it. A chap at the Wellcome Institute in London, the Wellcome Library, who'd done a little bit about the floating hospital, and there was some pictures of it online as well. It's some kind of huge sort of bloated tub with little extra structures added to it. Well, it's pretty much like I described it, and it was a really dark place. It was always being fumigated because it was terrible smells and frying bloaters and smoking men and things. So it sounds like a hideous place.
I was trying to weigh up actually what sounded more hideous, the floating ship or Corvus Hall in the most recent one, with the smells and as an anatomy school, and before the time where it was proper preservation of cadavers, and it was very dependent on seasons. I was just like, oh, it's like I can't tell which ones. But is it just like that? You hear something really interesting from history, and you're like, that is where it's going to be set.
Yeah, the hospital thing had interested me with the first novel, because I knew I wanted to do a medical history based thing, and I thought, well, the hospital seemed the obvious location if you run the history of medicine. And also, when you've got an institution, there's going to be rivalries, bad behaviour and backstabbing and all sorts of stuff going on that you wouldn't get if it was just doctors in private practice. So I wanted that intense medical world. And then the asylum, I mean, that's always intriguing. Who's not interested in the history of psychiatry? Everyone is. I mean, if you're not interested in that, then there must be something wrong with you, because surely it's fascinating how we understand how the mind works and the different types of ways of treatment. And again, the 1850s is this period of uncertainty. How do we treat people? We've only just left the idea of, that we need to strap them into chairs and hose them with cold water. We haven't quite got towards any idea of psychiatry that we understand. We've just had, you've just got anaesthetics, so you can now knock people out. So you could do brain surgery. So I'll put a bit of that in. Mixed phrenology, that idea of the science of the lumps and bumps of the head, which is quite an old conception of how our minds work. And I mix that with the idea that now it's in our power to do brain surgery. So, if you've got a lump in your head here that suggests that you're an angry person, if we open your head, cut that bit off, you won't be angry anymore.
Yeah.
I have no idea if anyone did that, but it makes sense if you're a pioneering doctor to try those things. I had one of the doctors do that. And the ship was interesting, the medical school was really interesting, but I did quite like that idea of a world. Each of them is sort of its own.
Yes. Yeah, it did. Because obviously a lot of the plot then evolves around that location. It was kind of creating these mini worlds that Jem was encountering with all the people that essentially lived in it and worked in it. I think was it in Surgeons Hall, and no. It was On the Blood, and talking about how actually when Jem was investigating a lot of the murders, it's like, well, this new world is totally new to you. You can't trust anyone. I think Will says that, and it was just really interesting to see these little kind of ecosystems you've created, and how Jem essentially is so strong-willed and is so like, I'm going to figure it out, and I don't care what the setting is, which was fascinating to see as well.
Yeah, thank you. But the settings have been quite important, these kind of institutions. And the first 4 I've done have all had that as a thing. But the one I've just finished, Nightshade, it does not have an institutional context, which is the first time I've done that. It's all sort of poison based, and partly set in India, so it's a bit of a different way of looking at things.
Because you deal with a lot of herbal medicine. Where did that do you just know a ridiculous amount about herbal medicine? Because I was just like, I've got no idea, because Jem lists off all these plants, and then it's like that for that for that. Is that from part of your research that you've done in the past, or is it just an area that you're fascinated in and you're like, yeah, this could be part of it?
Well, do you know what? I don't know anything about plants at all, and I've all my window boxes are dead, and my hands are struggling. It's just catastrophe, to be perfectly honest. But do you know what? I really wish I knew it. I wish I could remember that kind of information and I knew all about it, but I don't. I mean, I know a few things, and sometimes people are like, "Ooh, that you how did you know goldenrod is good for kidney stones?" I think, well, it's just because I had to read it for Jem Flockhart. But I've got my library, my shelves here. I've got my herbal books there, and of course Dr. Google is always very useful.
Oh yes, of course, yes.
When I need to find out a few things. But I know very little. I'm not the gardener at all. I wish I was, but I find it really hard to retain sort of scientific and medical facts. I'm a kind of waffling story kind of a person. So detail that is in my books will always be right, but it won't be something I've just plucked out of my head. It's because I've researched it and made a big effort to get the right thing.
Well, it is very impressive. Just the paragraphs that come up where Jem's listing all these things, and then obviously the physic gardening as well, and that being such a special place to her. I just assumed, I'm like, well, she clearly did a PhD in herbal medicine because this is amazing.